The Candyman. On October 31st, 1974, the streets of Pasadena, Texas were filled with trick-or-treaters. It was a cold, misty evening, and Ronald O'Brien wore a raincoat as he walked with his two children, 8-year-old Timothy and 5-year-old Elizabeth, along with his neighbor Jim Bates, and Bates's two children. At one house, the children knocked but received no answer. Growing impatient, they ran ahead to the next home while O'Brien lingered behind. When he caught up with the group moments later, he produced 5 giant pixie sticks, claiming the occupant of the dark house had finally answered and given him the expensive treats. Back home that evening, Timothy asked if he could have a piece of candy before bed. His parents agreed, and he chose the pixie sticks. Almost immediately, Timothy complained that it tasted bitter. O'Brien quickly gave his son Kool-Aid to wash away the taste. Within minutes, Timothy began experiencing severe stomach pains. He ran to the bathroom, vomiting and convulsing violently. His father carried him as he went limp, rushing him toward help. But Timothy died in the ambulance. The pixie sticks contained enough potassium cyanide to kill 3 adults. Investigation revealed a horrifying truth. O'Brien was over $100,000 in debt and had held 21 jobs in the past 10 years. Just months before Halloween, he had secretly taken out $10,000 life insurance policies on both children. He had visited chemical supply stores asking about cyanide and lethal dosages. The man at the dark house was working at the airport with over 200 witnesses. O'Brien had hidden the poisoned pixie sticks in his raincoat sleeves. He gave them to his own children and 3 others to make it look random. The jury took 46 minutes to convict him. O'Brien was executed by lethal injection on March 31, 1984. Timothy's story is a tragic reminder that sometimes danger appears where you least expect it. I found this out the hard way when I searched my own name and email on the internet. Page after page of data broker sites had my private details, old addresses, phone numbers, even information about my family, all just sitting there for anyone to access. It feels violating. Data brokers collect and sell your information without your consent, making billions in the process. And while they're technically supposed to remove it if you ask, the process is so frustrating and complicated that most people just give up. That's where today's sponsor, Aura, comes in. Aura handles this automatically. They get your information taken down from these sites and they keep it off. I use Aura myself and I recommend it to my family and friends because it's the only way I actually feel protected online. But Aura is much more than just data removal. It's a full digital security platform. It alerts you if your info shows up on the dark web, gives you real-time fraud alerts for your bank and credit accounts, and includes a secure VPN, antivirus, a password manager, and 24/7 US-based support. And if anything ever does happen, they back you with $5 million in identity theft insurance. It's honestly infuriating that companies profit by selling our private lives like products. That's why I chose Aura. And you can try it free for 14 days with my link in the description or the pinned comment. In just 2 weeks, you'll see exactly how much of your personal information is being exposed. I wouldn't go online unprotected anymore, and neither should you. Thanks to Aura for sponsoring this video. The Fake Trick-or-Treater. On October 31st, 1957, in Sun Valley, California, Peter Fabiano and his wife Betty had just settled into bed when the doorbell rang. It was after 11 p.m., far too late for trick-or-treaters. Nevertheless, Peter got up and went downstairs to answer the door. Betty heard him say, "It's a little late for this, isn't it?" A voice responded, "No." Then came a pop. Betty and her teenage daughter Judy rushed to the front door. Peter was bleeding heavily from a gunshot wound to his chest. He died almost immediately. The killer had worn a grotesque Halloween costume, blue jeans, khaki jacket, red gloves, and a domino mask with painted features. The figure had held up a paper bag concealing a handgun, fired once, then fled to a waiting car. Peter was a successful beauty salon owner and Marine veteran. When police asked Betty about enemies, she named Joan Rabel. Joan had worked at Peter's salon and became close with Betty. When their marriage struggled, Betty moved in with Joan. The relationship became romantic, but Betty eventually returned to Peter, agreeing never to see Joan again. Joan was devastated. She met Goldine Pizer, a recently divorced medical secretary. Over 4 years of coffee mornings, Joan manipulated Goldine, describing Peter as vile, abusive, and evil. None of it was true. On September 21st, 1957, Goldine purchased a .38 caliber revolver. On Halloween, they dressed in disguises and drove to the Fabiano home, waiting until all lights went out. Goldine approached the door and shot Peter while Joan waited as getaway driver. 2 weeks later, detectives traced the gun to Goldine. She confessed immediately. Both women pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and were sentenced to 5 years to life. The Wrong Door Incident. On October 17, 1992, 16-year-old Yoshihiro Hattori and his American host brother Webb Haymaker were excited to attend a Halloween party. Yoshi, an exchange student from Japan who had arrived in Baton Rouge, Louisiana just 2 months earlier, dressed in a white tuxedo, imitating John Travolta in Saturday Night Fever. Around 8 p.m., they drove to the neighborhood where the party was being held. Due to similar addresses and Halloween decorations, they mistakenly approached the wrong house. The boys rang the doorbell, but got no response and started walking back to their car. Inside, Bonnie Pear saw them through a side door. Startled by the costumed figures, she locked the door and told her husband, "Rodney, get your gun." Rodney Pears grabbed a loaded .44 Magnum revolver. When he opened the carport door, he saw the boys returning to their car. He pointed the gun at Yoshi and yelled, "Freeze!" Yoshi, walking back toward the house thinking he'd found the party, didn't understand the command or notice the weapon. Webb saw it and shouted desperately after his friend. Pierres fired a single shot. The bullet pierced both lobes of Yoshi's left lung. He died in the ambulance minutes later from blood loss. Initially, police quickly questioned and released Pierres, saying he was within his rights. Only after Louisiana's governor and the Japanese consul protested was Pear charged with manslaughter. His defense claimed Yoshi moved in an extremely unusual manner that any reasonable person would find scary. The jury took just over 3 hours to acquit Pierre. Yoshi's parents sued in civil court and won $650,000 in damages. The Hayride Incident. On October 11, 2014, 17-year-old Cassidy Charette and several of her classmates arrived at Harvest Hill Farm in Mechanic Falls, Maine for a night of Halloween fun. They were there to experience the Gauntlet, a popular haunted hayride attraction. Cassidy was a top honor student at Messalonsky High School, ranking first academically in her class of 244 and a standout varsity soccer player. It was supposed to be a thrilling evening of harmless scares. The attraction used a 1979 Jeep CJ5 to pull a trailer carrying more than 20 passengers through the corn maze. Around evening, the Jeep began descending a hill. Suddenly, the vehicle went out of control. The Jeep and trailer flipped over, sending passengers flying through the air. Cassidy and her friends were thrown from the trailer violently. Several others suffered broken bones, ankle injuries, and abrasions. 22 people were taken to hospitals. Cassidy's injuries were the most severe. She died at the scene. Investigation revealed shocking negligence. The Jeep's rear brakes did not work at all. The front brakes were not functioning properly. The vehicle was hauling more than double its intended towing capacity. The brake fluid reservoir was empty, and several brake parts were missing or improperly installed. Employees had warned farm owner Peter Bolduc that the Jeep's brakes were faulty, telling him he should junk it. Bolduc had ignored the warnings. The vehicles went years without maintenance. In November 2016, Harvest Hill Farm pleaded guilty to a felony charge of aggravated driving to endanger. Cassidy's family filed a wrongful death lawsuit, which settled in 2017. The money went to support the Shine on Cassidy Foundation, established in Cassidy's memory. The Costume Incident. On October 31, 2020, the streets of Quebec City's Old Quebec neighborhood were quieter than usual due to pandemic restrictions. At about 10:30 p.m., residents began reporting a man in medieval costume wandering near the Parliament building. He wore black jogging pants, black leather boots, a short-sleeved kimono, and a black mask. At first, passers-by assumed it was just an elaborate Halloween costume. Then, the screaming started. The man wielded a katana-style Japanese sword with a blade over 76 centimeters long. He attacked victims at random in at least 4 locations, including near the famous Chateau Frontenac Hotel, on du Trésor Street, and on du Rempart Street. Witnesses described chaos as people ran in all directions. 56-year-old François Duchesne, a museum employee, was killed. 61-year-old Suzanne Clermont, a hairdresser, was also killed. 5 others were wounded, some with serious injuries. The victims were chosen completely at random. After a 2.5-hour manhunt, 24-year-old Carl Girouard was arrested shortly before 1 a.m. When captured, he was lying on the ground, barefoot and hypothermic. He surrendered to police. Investigation revealed that 5 years earlier, in a medical context, Girouard had verbalized an intention to commit a violent act. Girouard told his trial that by age 18, he had hatched a mission involving killing people with a sword and creating chaos. He said there were 2 competing versions of himself in his head, including a bad version who took over on Halloween night. In May 2022, Girouard was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder and 5 counts of attempted murder. The Egging Murder. On October 31, 1998, 21-year-old Carl Jackson was driving through the Bronx with his girlfriend Darlene and her 9-year-old son Clyde. They were heading to pick up Clyde from a children's party so they could all attend another Halloween celebration together. Jackson had just turned 21 weeks earlier. He was a quiet young man, son of a nurse and a postal worker, who worked as a data entry clerk at Morgan Stanley. As they drove through the neighborhood, suddenly an egg smashed against their car window. Then another. A group of teenagers was throwing eggs at passing vehicles. Jackson stopped the car and stepped out to confront them. An argument erupted on the dark street. Voices were raised. Jackson, realizing the situation was escalating, turned and sat back down in the passenger seat. Then 17-year-old Curtis Sterling pulled out a gun. A single shot rang out through the Halloween night, striking Jackson in the head. He died instantly. A young life was snuffed out over nothing, Jackson's father told reporters. But that's what Halloween has gotten into. Jackson's mother Gloria said, "I think it took us 2 years to even talk about it. We were just devastated. We never thought that anyone from our family would be murdered, especially on a holiday for something stupid." Between 1984 and 2010, at least 24 people in New York City were seriously wounded or killed in stabbings, shootings, beatings, or accidents sparked by egg-throwing confrontations around Halloween. Curtis Sterling was convicted and sentenced to 20 years in prison. Every Halloween, Carl Jackson's mother sends Sterling a card telling him she's glad he was in prison, though he was released in December 2015. Napa Halloween Incident. On October 31, 2004, in Napa, California, 3 roommates spent the evening handing out candy to trick-or-treaters at their home on Dorset Street. 26-year-old Leslie Mazzara, a former beauty queen from South Carolina, 26-year-old Adrienne Insonga, a civil engineer, and 27-year-old Lauren Meazza, a volleyball coach, laughed and chatted as they gave out treats. By 11 p.m., the trick-or-treaters had stopped coming. All 3 women went to bed. Leslie and Adrienne slept in upstairs bedrooms. Lauren's room was downstairs. Around 2 a.m., Lauren woke to the sound of breaking glass. Then she heard blood-curdling screams from upstairs. Heavy footsteps pounded through the house. Lauren listened in terror as the footsteps grew louder, coming down the stairs toward her. She ran out the back door and hid in the yard, barely breathing. She heard someone climbing out of the basement window and running off into the darkness. Lauren cautiously re-entered the house and made her way upstairs. What she found was a scene of horror. Leslie lay face down in a pool of blood, roughly 2 inches deep. Adrienne was near the back of the bed, barely alive and bleeding heavily. Lauren slipped on the blood as she frantically tried to escape and call for help. Both women had been stabbed multiple times. When police arrived, both were dead. Investigation eventually revealed the killer was 26-year-old Eric Koppel, who was engaged to Lily Prudhomme, a close friend of Adrienne's. Eric had attended the housewarming party when the women moved in. DNA evidence from the scene linked him to the murders. Eric Koppel was convicted and sentenced to 2 life sentences with no possibility of parole. The Cold Case. On the evening of October 30, 1975, mischief night, 15-year-old Martha Moxley left her home in the Belle Haven section of Greenwich, Connecticut. It was the night before Halloween, when neighborhood youths would traditionally ring bells and pull pranks like toilet papering houses. Martha was a popular student who had moved to Greenwich from California just over a year earlier. She was excited to spend the evening with friends. Martha joined other teenagers at the Skakel house across the street. According to friends, Martha began flirting with and eventually kissed Thomas Skakel, 17. Later, Martha was seen falling together behind the fence with Thomas near the pool in the Skakel backyard, around 9:30 p.m. Then, Martha disappeared into the darkness. The next morning, October 31st, Halloween Day, Martha's mother became worried when her daughter hadn't come home. A search began. That afternoon, Martha's body was found beneath a tree in her family's backyard. Pieces of a broken 6-iron golf club were found near the body. An autopsy indicated she had been both beaten and stabbed with a club, which was traced back to the Skakel residence. The case attracted worldwide publicity because the Skakel children were nieces and nephews of Ethel Skakel Kennedy, widow of Senator Robert F. Kennedy. For decades, no one was charged. Then, in 2000, Michael Skakel, 15 at the time of the murder, was arrested at age 41. He was convicted in 2002 and sentenced to 20 years to life. However, in 2018, the Connecticut Supreme Court vacated his conviction. On October 30, 2020, exactly 45 years after Martha's murder, the state announced it would not retry Skakel. The murder remains officially unsolved. Taylor Van Diest. On October 33, 2011, in Armstrong, British Columbia, 18-year-old Taylor Van Diest left her house dressed as a zombie. She was excited to meet friends for one last Halloween of trick-or-treating before they were too old. Taylor was a 2011 graduate of Pleasant Valley Secondary School, an honor student, standout athlete, and lifelong volunteer who was beloved in her small community. Around 6 p.m., as darkness fell, Taylor began walking along railroad tracks toward her friend's house. It was a short walk she'd made many times before. She texted back and forth with her friend as she walked. The messages were normal, chatting about typical teenage topics. Then, at 6:01 p.m., Taylor sent a text that said she was being creeped or followed. That was the last communication Taylor ever sent. When Taylor didn't arrive, her friend became worried and called her repeatedly. No answer. A search began immediately with friends, family, and police scouring the area. 2 hours later, they found Taylor badly beaten and clinging to life along a quiet stretch of train tracks. She was rushed to Columbia General Hospital, but died the next morning from her injuries. She had been strangled and bludgeoned with a heavy flashlight. Her head wounds were fatal. DNA found under Taylor's fingernails linked the murder to 28-year-old Matthew Forster from Cherryville. During interrogation, when officers asked, "Do you feel bad for killing Taylor?" Forster said yes. He confessed to hitting Taylor multiple times with a flashlight and leaving her to die. Forster pleaded guilty to second-degree murder in 2018 and was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 17 years. Taylor and her family had never met Forster before that night. Christopher Jenkins. On Halloween night, October 31st, 2002, 21-year-old Christopher Jenkins left his apartment in Minneapolis dressed in a Native American costume. He was excited for a night of Halloween bar hopping with his girlfriend and another couple. Jenkins was a University of Minnesota business senior, captain of the school's lacrosse team, smart, popular, and well-liked. It was supposed to be a fun night. The group went to the Lone Tree Bar and Grill in downtown Minneapolis. Around midnight, Jenkins was kicked out of the bar for being too intoxicated. He left behind his phone, wallet, and jacket. The bouncer watched him take a left on Hennepin Avenue and disappear into the cold Halloween night. That was the last time anyone saw Christopher Jenkins alive. When Jenkins didn't return home, family and friends immediately became worried. They worked with police to search for him. On 2 separate occasions, bloodhounds tracked his scent from a pizza shop across from the bar to a parking garage. Drops of blood were found in the garage, but his scent ended there. Then the trail went cold. 4 months later, on February 27, 2003, a worker spotted something in the Mississippi River. Jenkins's body was found floating on its back between the 3rd Avenue Bridge and St. Anthony Falls, still wearing his Halloween costume. His oversized shoes were still on. His shirt was still tucked into his pants. His arms were folded across his chest. He had human hair clenched in his left hand. GHB, a common drug used to incapacitate victims, was found in his system. Police initially ruled it accidental drowning, but later reclassified it as homicide after receiving information from a jailed witness. In 2018, prosecutors said the case was not chargeable. The murder remains unsolved. The zombie bus incident. On October 10, 2014, 18-year-old Jeremy McSpadden arrived at the incredible corn maze in Hauser, Idaho, for his first night of work. He was excited and nervous. The attraction featured a Zombie Slayer paintball bus, where patrons would ride through the corn maze on a modified school bus, shooting at workers dressed as zombies with paintball guns mounted outside the windows. Jeremy, a tall and athletic West Valley High School senior, had been hired to play one of the zombies. His cousins and friends had been working there for weeks and told him it was great fun and easy money. Around 10:30 p.m., Jeremy was in position, ready to perform. His job was to emerge from hiding spots in the corn maze and pretend to attack the bus while riders shot paintballs at him. As the bus slowly rolled through the field, Jeremy emerged from his hiding spot and ran toward the rear of the bus to play his role. Then Jeremy stumbled. Multiple witnesses saw him fall forward, landing directly in front of the passenger side rear tires. The bus immediately ran over him. Due to the uneven terrain of the cornfield, the bus rocked and bumped constantly. Nobody on the bus realized what had happened. Many of the patrons believed it was just part of the ride. The bus continued moving away from Jeremy's location. Only when the role players began to reset for the next bus did anyone realize something was wrong. Jeremy McSpadden died at the scene. His aunt said the teens were told they would be paid $50 for each night. It was Jeremy's first night. His cousin had fallen under the bus a few nights earlier but was unharmed. No charges were filed. The Zombie Slayer bus attraction remained closed. If you'd like to see more stories like this, make sure to subscribe and feel free to drop suggestions for the next video in the comments.